Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very nice to come back to my hometown of Tallinn, because currently I work in Brussels. I just maybe wanted to start with a little bit of a reflection about what is identity. And I think the trap here is that when it comes to migrant children or migrants in general, we really focus too much on the religious and cultural identity, which is just one part or one fragment of a person's identity. And if you all think about what could be the main things that you identify yourself, for myself, I can also say that I identify myself much more as a feminist, as a working mother, than, for example, being Christian by cultural background or so on. So I think it's really important that we don't kind of pigeonhole migrants and migrant children, young people, into this cultural and religious route. Because I think what's the most important thing is that the states should allow all children to have the conditions that they need to safely develop their identities in a way that they best see fit. So I would just like to maybe quickly first give an example where states' actions actually deny child migrants their identity in the most blatant way, and then maybe give a few examples where the multiple failures of state negatively impact the situation of children and their development, which also negatively impacts their identity. And if the negative impact is so profound, it really creates this kind of alienation, feeling of otherness that has very, very severe impacts, not only on the child, but also our societies as a whole. So maybe just also I forgot that I wanted to just say a few words about my organization that I represent. We're a platform of organizations across Europe and also beyond, and we specifically focus on the situation of undocumented migrants, so migrants who are without resident status in Europe. They have lost it for many different reasons. We also heard today, especially the examples from Sweden, how the policies around migration are becoming more and more restrictive, and we're going to see much more people falling out of the system, so-called. They're going to be denied asylum. They're going to be given short-term permits, which are impossible to prolong, so people will stay in the country without resident status. So this is the focus that we have, and we do a lot of work around undocumented children in particular, because arguably they are the most vulnerable children, because they have themselves or their parents do not have resident status. They have really big barriers to access basic rights and basic services and so on. So just as an example, I wanted to just read to you a testimony of a young Afghani child who traveled a very perilous journey to Calais, finally reached Calais, tried 100 times to get to a lorry to get to the UK, where some of his family members were present. And after the 100th attempt, he finally managed to reach the UK. And then he says, after being arrested and sent to an immigration center, I had my age assessment, an issue that we also discussed today. After 3 or 4 hours, they announced that I was not 13, but 16 and a half. They said that I couldn't have traveled so far when I was still so young, and that I was too smart to be 13. I know I looked older than I was, I still do, but I grew up in a harsh situation, and I had been through a long, hard journey. They tried to give me a new date of birth. I was so angry. I felt they were worse than the smugglers. They had been heartless, but they hadn't tried to change my identity. I was so angry. I ripped up the paper the assessors gave me in front of them. In fact, they refused to believe I was even from Afghanistan, although they never told me where else they thought my home was. It was stressful and distressing. I didn't know why they were saying all this. Now I know it. It's because the Home Office have to put you in school and in foster care and give you the legal rights of a child if you are under 16. Instead, they put me in an independent living center with adult asylum seekers and told me when I was 18, which according to them was in a year and a half, I would be deported back to Afghanistan. After that, I felt broken inside. I felt hopeless that I had come all this way through so much hardship, and now people were saying I was a liar. It was so bad that I tried to kill myself twice in the months that followed. So basically, this is a very blatant example where the state actually just tries to deny the identity that you have or that you come with. And I think a lot has to be done around the issue of states actually trying to deny children the right to be children, because it's linked to so many more obligations from the part of the state. It also links to the issue about kind of trying to categorize children. And I think if there is one policy area, then it's the issue of children's rights, where we really have to look at all children, irrespective of their status, irrespective of the reasons they've come here, and really have a kind of open an approach where children can be children first and foremost, a kind of slogan that has been said many times here. But we have a legal basis to say that. We have a legal basis to have a universal, inclusive, non-discriminatory approach. And yet this is not put in place. And I'm happy that there are specific safeguards for unaccompanied children, for trafficked children, etc. But we also have to be mindful that these are also labels that sometimes actually also harm other groups of children. Like, for example, when you have these specific safeguards for unaccompanied children, we know of many cases where actually families have to separate from their children because they know that through some of these policy routes, children actually get access to rights. So we have to also be mindful of when we do categorize children and give children certain rights and other children less rights, we create this kind of situation. I have very little time left, so I wanted to just focus maybe on two issues quickly. Education and child detention, because education is really, it's been said so many times, it's an absolute crucial thing in terms of helping children to develop a healthy identity, to be happy, to feel included. Yet the situation in many EU countries is that children who become undocumented, they have so much fear, and also families as well, children who are with their families who are undocumented, that they don't go to schools because they can be arrested near schools. So there's a lot of fear that these families have to live with that we have to be mindful of. All EU member states have laws that require children to attend schooling for at least 8 years, and in most countries this is actually understood implicitly to include also all children regardless of status. Yet there are still many barriers, actually, administrative barriers and limitations. Like, for example, if you're an undocumented child, you cannot take, in certain countries, official examinations. So basically you attend school, but you have nothing to show for it. We do see, of course, good examples from some member states where there is an explicit mention that all children, regardless of status, have to have access to schools, and all administrative barriers have to be removed. For example, Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, France, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Romania, Spain, and Sweden are countries that really explicitly say that. So that's really, really important to allow children to feel included, to avoid this kind of feeling of otherness and exclusion. So I think all of the EU member states have to kind of look of how they would be able to put in place laws and practices that actually explicitly allow for all children to access education. My time is over, but I still wanted to make a quick point about immigration detention, as we really feel this is the ultimate child rights violation. And it's so severe, and it has such severe impacts on children and their families that cannot be underestimated. And I think if states allow for the locking up of children for absolutely no reason, what kind of identity development or development in general would you expect from a child after that? just to mention, I was very happy to see also the commissioner saying, that child detention is absolutely never in the best interest of the child, and it's always a child rights violation, even if it's for the absolutely shortest period of time. Yet we still see that 17 European countries do detain unaccompanied children, and 19 countries detain families with children. So what we can say is the practice is still widespread. And some countries that say that they don't detain children, they actually separate families. So they detain their parents and they separate their children and put them in institutional care. So what we do see is that there should be an absolute urgent turn to ending child detention as such, and no last resort language, no, avoid, end child detention, point blank. And there are many, many good examples of alternatives, like some governments, for example, Austria, Ireland, and Sweden, they are implementing already promising alternatives. So I think this is really, at our day and age, the absolute crucial issue that we all have to raise. And unfortunately, the EU Returns Directive allows for this, also as with a last resort language. We're really happy that UNICEF, for example, is on board, other UN agencies, some not, but that we really have to be clear on this in the human rights community as well, that it's absolutely not allowed as a practice. Thank you very much. My time is up.